On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend my warmest welcome to all delegates and distinguished guests, and thank you for taking time off your busy schedules to join us this Saturday. My name is Beverly, and I will be your MC for today. Since 2015, the Warwick ASEAN Conference has been about gathering youths from around the UK to discuss contemporary issues affecting the ASEAN region. Team Resurgence. The 2021 edition of WAC will engage delegates in meaningful discourses revolving around the issues of the pandemic and its imminent impact on future job opportunities within ASEAN. Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all our lives, forcing us to make changes to the way we live, the way we work, and to adapt to a new reality. But what course will it take in the long run? That is the question we aim to address today. We hope that all of us here could use this conference as a platform not only to expand our knowledge about ASEAN, but also as a stepping stone towards participating in and contributing towards building a forward-looking ASEAN community. Today's proceedings feature a keynote address, an economics and politics panel, networking sessions with partner firms, and embassies engagement sessions with embassies representatives. Before we begin, let us watch a video showing us more about what you can expect from this year's conference. Sit back and relax.
The World Health Organization declares a pandemic.
Experts have warned the odds of a possible recession have increased.
The coronavirus outbreak has wiped more than $16 trillion off the global stock market.
As coronavirus spreads across the West, new signs of hope in Asia.
First of all, for the people who say that kids cannot do something, I'd say that we are the people who are going to lead the world in the future.
A phenomenon known as heat energy, which increases the temperature of Earth at an unprecedented rate.
It's not just a global health crisis, it is also a socio-economic crisis.
We hope that make you look forward to what is in store ahead of us today. To formally commence the conference, we would like to welcome Ms. Tan Sisi, the Chief Coordinator of the Warwick ASEAN Conference 2021, to give her welcome address. Sisi, the floor is all yours.
Just to check, can everyone hear my audio?
Yes, Ms. Tan Sisi, you are all good.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Sorry for the technical delays today. Let me just continue with my welcome address. So, Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as this year's Chief Coordinator, it gives me great delight to welcome you to the 2021 edition of the Warwick ASEAN Conference. To those who have joined us from yesterday, welcome back, and I hope you will continue to have a productive time today. For those joining us today, no matter where you may be, thank you for taking time off your busy schedules to support our conference this year. Before I go any further, I would like to express appreciation to the partners and stakeholders without whom this conference would not have been possible. To our ASEAN Embassy partners who are joining us today from Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, thank you for your constant presence and support at WAC. The student engagements with the ASEAN embassies continue to remain a hallmark of WAC, and we would like to express our heartfelt gratitude in maintaining the partnership across the years. To our partners, ASEAN UK Business Forum, Bright Network, and Singapore Global Network, thank you for your unwavering support in enabling our efforts to bring WAC to a new level. This conference would not be possible without you. To our esteemed speakers who are joining us today from across the globe, We are extremely grateful to be able to learn from your experiences and insights. Thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us, and we hope that today will be fruitful not just for the delegates, but for yourselves as well. We would also like to thank the ASEAN Student Societies in Warwick and beyond for helping us to promote our cause and working closely with us throughout the year. Although the COVID-19 pandemic might have prevented us from meeting in person, we are thankful for the modern digital platforms available, allowing us to continue bringing together student delegates from ASEAN origins and beyond as we continue to celebrate ASEAN as a thriving identity. Last, but definitely not the least, I want to express my deepest appreciation to the dedicated organizing committee of WAC 2021. This academic year has ushered in unexpected changes, and it is unprecedented having to work across multiple time zones. However, we overcame all obstacles together as we remained steadfast in achieving our common objectives. I think one of the biggest victories for us as youths is seeing how we have worked so hard towards this common goal and how it has eventually brought us together as a community. Unlike a physical conference, you may only see a few of us today. However, it has been a blessing to lead and strive alongside all 44 of you, working behind the scenes right from the very day we assumed office. It's your tireless efforts that have made today a reality. I thank you from the bottom of my heart and truly hope that we will be reunited under the same space together soon. For 7 years, WAC has provided a platform for youths from all around the UK to gather as a community and discuss contemporary issues affecting Southeast Asia, a region that many of us are proud to call home. Yesterday, we were joined by a panel of youth speakers and representatives from Bright Network as delegates gain insights on how better to navigate the business and corporate world. Today, we will get the opportunity to hear from professionals who possess an impressive set of multi-sectoral experiences, network with representatives from a range of industries, and engage with representatives from our ASEAN embassies directly. The theme for this year, Resurgence, aims to tie all of these activities together. As the world prepares for a new normal, we are propelled to reimagine life. This includes revamping our usual work model, even here at WAC. Across this year, we did not succumb to distance as an obstacle, but have instead been developing in genuine initiatives to engage youths in discourses regarding pertinent issues across various digital platforms. Above all, this includes the development of our brand new YouTube channel directed by our public relations team, insightful articles on the hot button issues in ASEAN, crafted by our publications team, a virtual ASEAN Cultural Night organized under our events team, where we invited artists and students from across ASEAN to showcase the diverse cultures of our region, as well as our Coffee Insights initiative, where our speakers team helmed interviews with esteemed professionals from various fields. The reach of WAC has increased beyond our imagination, evident by the wide-ranging institutions our delegates originate from, including the University of Cambridge, London School of Economics and Political Science, the National University of Singapore, Goethe University Frankfurt, University of Melbourne, Renmin University, Universitas Indonesia, and many more across the world. Beyond WAC, COVID-19 has undoubtedly accelerated the shift to digital. Employers in fields of work have adapted to working remotely to communicate and collaborate. Will we see a transformation and reskilling of the ASEAN workforce? Given crisis-related disruptions in global supply chains, will we be experiencing a shift of supply chains closer to ASEAN and the end users? Are we moving towards a flexible working revolution? While change continues to remain the only constant, and the future that lies ahead of us will only be filled with unimaginable possibilities, I hope that this year's conference will introduce new ideas, initiate productive conversations, and inculcate a shared sense of commitment towards building a progressive future together. With that, I wish all of you a productive and memorable conference ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sichi, for your speech. This year, we are delighted to invite Dato' SK Lingam to give his keynote address on the future job trends and opportunities in ASEAN and the empowerment of ASEAN youth. Dato' SK Lingam is the founder of the ASEAN UK Business Forum and the Malaysia Link UK, which forges Malaysia UK and ASEAN UK bilateral relations. Over the years, he has also acted as an international corporate consultant, possessing rich experiences in the international legal, trade, and development industry across Europe and ASEAN regions. Without further ado, I would like to warmly welcome Dato' SK Lingam to take the stage. Dato', the floor is yours.
Can you hear me, Beverly?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Salam to everybody. Before I commence with my speech, I would like everybody to join me to observe a 30 seconds silence in memory of all our brothers and sisters in ASEAN as well as in the UK who have perished as a result of this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So 30 seconds from now, please observe. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome to the new normal, Zooming. The odd thing about Zooming is that you have to refrain from eating, drinking, or smoking during a Zoom meeting because everything is so laser focused on your face. So I made sure that at least I had a good shape this morning. Your Excellencies, the ambassadors and high commissioners of ASEAN to the Court of St. James's, the chief coordinator, Tan Siki, of the Warwick ASEAN Conference, distinguished panel, and honored guests. Salam and a very good morning to those of you here in London and in Europe, and a very good evening to those of you in ASEAN, in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Brunei, Cambodia, and in the other countries. It is so great to know that so many young people from the ASEAN youths and students are here today. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the organizers of this event, the Warwick ASEAN Conference team, led by the formidable Tan Si Kui, assisted by the Deputy Coordinator, NIMP, and the other colleagues, Beverly, Ruji, Jeremy, and others. Thank you all for your untiring efforts and selfless sacrifice for organizing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, give them all a warm hand. Due to time constraints, my speech will briefly cover three aspects: a snapshot overview of ASEAN, future job trends in ASEAN post-COVID-19, and lastly, the empowerment of the ASEAN youth. A snapshot overview of ASEAN. Asia is one of the largest continents in the world. It represents 30% of the Earth's landmass, home to 60% of the world's population, and consists of 44 countries, including the superstates of China and India. And within this continent of Asia, you have the 10 countries of Southeast Asia, with its acronym ASEAN, consisting of Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Brunei. ASEAN has a total population of 655 million people, speaking 900 different languages and dialects, and the GDP of ASEAN is approximately $3.1 trillion. Today, in 2021, the receding daily COVID-19 cases, the rollout of vaccines, increased spending by the ASEAN governments along with the easing of monetary restrictions is helping not only to revive but bring about the resurgence of ASEAN economies with their real GDP forecasted by global data to rise by 6%. ASEAN was established on the 8th of August 1967 by 5 member states, and by 1999 we have the 10 states. The first line of the ASEAN anthem, yes, we have an ASEAN national anthem called the ASEAN Way. The first line reads, "We are bonded by being as one," by which ASEAN seeks to establish an ASEAN community based on the strength of its diversity. On the 31st of December 2015, the ASEAN Economic Community, AEC, came into being. The AEC aims to sustain the momentum of regional integration and further contribute to strengthening of ASEAN community building efforts. ASEAN as a regional group as the third largest market in Asia after China and Japan. It has a huge young market with a rising middle class. In terms of trade, it is the fourth largest in the world, trailing only the European Union, North America, and China. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a snapshot overview of ASEAN. Now I will confine myself to focusing on two relevant issues to the youths and students of ASEAN. Firstly, the trends in the job market in ASEAN post-COVID-19 and the empowerment of the ASEAN youth. As to future job trends and opportunities in ASEAN, the fourth industrial revolution has been unfolding at an accelerating speed and changing the skills that future workers will need for the jobs of the future in ASEAN. The fourth industrial revolution, as you all know, relates to the emerging disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, Internet of Things, robotics, and data analytics. These changes are happening just as the working age population in ASEAN is expanding by 12,000 people every day, a rate that will continue for the next 15 years. The coronavirus pandemic has had a major effect on employment in nearly every industry over the past few months and has created a highly uncertain outlook for the labor market and accelerated the future of work. The future of jobs in the region is bright, although the nature of the work itself is changing. digital literacy is of paramount importance. It is estimated by 2025, that is in just 4 years' time, 85 million jobs may be displaced by the shift in the division of labor between humans and machines, while 97 million new roles may emerge that are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. In 9 years' time, that is by the year 2030, it is highly likely you will be working in a job that doesn't even exist yet. The world of work is evolving quickly. The rise of digital technologies means that you are going to need to be able to handle the plethora of opportunities and challenges that come with it. You have all heard the word STEM, S-T-E-M, but have you heard of SMAC, S-M-A-C, which means social, mobile, analytics, and cloud? That is the new buzzword. Although it may seem like we are being bombarded with digital buzzwords, being digitally literate offers capabilities to you students and youth beyond what was once thought possible. So you will need to develop your digital skills and your technical acumen to meet these challenges and opportunities in the changing landscape of future work trends. Already, digital skills are essential for the jobs of today, but they would be imperative for the jobs of tomorrow. Your future job is more than likely to include working closely with others. Hence, currently, and I was told this by a good friend of mine who is a recruiter in Indonesia, that currently in ASEAN, and this is the same trend all over in the UK and in Europe, that employers and hiring managers are looking beyond academic achievements by focusing on other work skills such as soft skills and digital skill sets. The soft skills include interpersonal people skills, communication skills, listening skills, time management, and empathy, and also the ability to collaborate among others. This modus operandi for recruitment criteria for talent is happening now, not just in the UK and in Europe, but in all the ASEAN countries. So make sure while you develop your digital skills, you also develop your soft skills. In the next 5 years, many jobs as we know them today will cease to exist. It won't be there. Many of us will need to reskill in the next 5 years as the double disruption of the economic impact of the pandemic and increasing automation transforming jobs takes hold. According to the World Economic Forum, the vast majority of business leaders, at least 94%, now expect employees to pick up new skills on the job, which is a sharp rise from 65% in 2018. Critical thinking and problem solving top the list of skills employers believe will grow in prominence in the next 5 years. Very important. Some employers are offering training internally and supplemented by online learning platforms. So please take advantage of such opportunities. The leaders, our leaders in ASEAN, definitely will need to make sure that the future workers in ASEAN receive the right training and education today. The dynamics of employment patterns were inevitable and would continue to evolve. The education system must be transformative and constantly realigned to meet the dynamic needs of employment patterns at all times. Our forward-thinking ASEAN government leaders are responding by focusing on improving the quality of the system of vocational training and skills training schools, thereby assisting our young people to adapt to new job requirements and challenges posed by the fourth industrial revolution. ASEAN's digital economy is growing leaps and bounds and will continue to do so. ASEAN could see an uplift of 1 trillion in GDP by 2025 by using its digital economy to accelerate intra-regional trade and growth. The impending labor market shifts expected as a result of automation and AI, artificial intelligence, is so large that I suspect that there is a distinct risk of a social backlash that could hold back the adoption of these technologies and constrain the long-term benefits they offer. But I am more optimistic. I believe that if workers have the right skills, the fourth industrial revolution will be highly empowering and will lift wages and living standards across the region. The hard part will be adopting these technologies in such a way as to mitigate disruption and dislocation for our citizens and help them toward a new kind of a working future. This is already happening in some of the emerging economies in ASEAN. Now I'll move on to the empowerment of the ASEAN youth. According to the ASEAN Charter, one of ASEAN's purposes is to promote a people-oriented ASEAN in which all sectors of society are encouraged to participate and benefit from the process of ASEAN integration and community building. About 60%, nearly 220 million of ASEAN demography today comprises those less than 35 years old. Sadly, that certainly excludes me, as on Chinese New Year's Day, I became 36 years old. My granddaughters listening would say, laugh out loud. ASEAN leaders have put into place policies that have enabled young people to involve more deeply in activities, to be part of the dialogue and policy-making processes in the ASEAN region. Such projects include youth volunteerism, youth entrepreneurship, and fourth industrial revolution skills for youth. In ASEAN, we have the establishment of the ASEAN Youth Volunteer Program and a regional youth volunteer initiative. So, my friends, get involved in volunteering activities. Youth entrepreneurship has been enhancing the entrepreneurial spirit, nurturing innovative startups. And this is a fact, as you can see, in Singapore and Indonesia, and also to some degree in Malaysia, we have startups that are now becoming unicorns. So the entrepreneurial spirit is very important. The ASEAN youth is indeed a strong force of the ASEAN population, which will play a key role in leading the post-COVID-19 recovery and also being the most strongly affected by the fourth industrial revolution. Last year, on the 5th of November 2020, the ASEAN leaders pledged that they will work for hand in hand with the ASEAN youth to overcome the difficulties and challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The ministers gave a firm commitment to address all these issues, which were highlighted by the World Economic Forum 2020 ASEAN Youth Survey on COVID-19. The ministers pledged to enhance ASEAN youth cooperation and fostering a future-ready ASEAN youth generation, which is one of the purposes of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. You, my friends, the students and youths, are the makers of tomorrow. You are ASEAN's greatest asset to shape the future of our region. As I always say, today's students are tomorrow's corporate and political leaders. It is therefore essential that you, the young people of ASEAN, possess an awareness of the ASEAN region. You must engage and play a key role in building a people-oriented ASEAN community. Apart from coming together as one ASEAN, we must collaborate beyond our borders. Hence, the fourth line in the ASEAN anthem, the national anthem, refers to looking out to the world. As such, ASEAN also collectively engages with dialogue partners such as United States, UK, EU, China, India, and Japan through direct collaborations via FTAs. As ASEAN citizens, the youth of ASEAN must possess a global mindset and cross-cultural skills to interact with not only with each other in ASEAN, but also to interact with your peers in the rest of the world. So please have a global mindset and develop cross-cultural skills. All of you who are studying in the UK, working in the UK, must interact not only with your fellow Malaysians and ASEAN brothers and sisters, but you must also interact with members of the host community, with the British and other foreign European students and African students. And you must seize these opportunities for such exposure, my friends, as they will serve you well in the future. the ASEAN UK Business Forum, of which I'm the president, and I know two of my colleagues, the chairman, Amy Alado, and the deputy chairman, Merlin To, are also attending this conference. And they asked me to specifically to mention to this gathering, especially directed at the students and youth, about ASEAN UK Business Forum's willingness and desire to form a strategy and close collaboration with student bodies and youth bodies. The ASEAN UK Business Forum, AUBF, which is acronym, is run on a voluntary basis by the senior members, mainly professionals and business people, albeit on a pro bono basis, and we are all members of the ASEAN diaspora in the UK, and we have been doing this for the last 23 years since our inception. Please get my contact details, email, and my WhatsApp number from the organizers and get in touch with us. Moving forward, we must jointly organize youth activities with a focus on a meaningful and impactful initiative. August 12 each year is United Nations International Youth Day, on which the impact, opportunities, and challenges of youth all over the world are celebrated. So we must jointly try and organize ASEAN-related activities against the backdrop of this United Nations International Youth Day. Finally, in closing, I wish to stress and put it bluntly, you are among the 220 million ASEAN youths who are our hope for the future, and the onus is on you, my friends, to forge ahead and build a long-lasting, prosperous, and an inclusive future for ASEAN and its people. With these words, I now call upon each one of you, ASEAN youngsters, the makers of tomorrow, to rise up to the challenge of shaping the future direction and destiny of ASEAN. Thank you all for your kind indulgence. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, stay alive. God bless you all. Thank you.
Dato' SK Lingam, for your invigorating speech. Digital economy is no doubt our future, and equipping students like ourselves with digital skills, soft skills, and cross-cultural skills are very crucial for the jobs of tomorrow, as well as the jobs for today, as mentioned by Dato'. Before we leave, Dato', would it be possible if we take a picture together?
Yes.
All right.
Let me adjust my collar.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
On the count of 3, please smile at the camera for 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And another one, please. 3, 2, 1. Say cheese.
Cheese! Thank you. God bless you guys.
Yes, thank you so much, Dato'. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience thus far. I hope you have enjoyed the sessions as much as I do. We will now proceed with the economics and politics panel. Recent geopolitical and economic developments have driven the continuous integration between global economies, necessitating the ability to provide a global outlook on topics and businesses. Now, we are so excited to present our economics and politics panel, which consists of a lineup of distinguished panelists with immense multi-sectoral experiences. Here, we have Mr. Azli Mohamad, the AirAsia Group's Chief Strategy and Growth Officer. Dr. Julia Tijacha, the Director at the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate from the ASEAN Secretariat. and Dr. Renard Siu, the Climate Change Advisor for the Center for Governance and Political Studies, and an ex-curator of Global Shapers and Expert Network member of the World Economic Forum. Lastly, our moderator for this panel will be Mr. Ravi Prasad, economist at the British High Commission in Singapore, where he works on UK-Singapore and UK-ASEAN economic policy. He was previously based at the British Embassy in Beijing, focused on UK-China trade policy. Prior to that, he worked on economic development projects in Ethiopia and Nigeria. He holds a BA in economics from Cambridge University and an MA from Peking University. Without further ado, let us warmly welcome Mr. Ravi Prasad and our panelists, Mr. Azli Mohammad, Dr. Julia Tijacha, and Dr. Renard Siu to take the spotlight. Panelists, the floor is all yours.
And thank you to all Warwick organisers for putting on the 7th edition of this Warwick ASEAN conference. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all joining today. So today's panel is titled Resurgence, Politics, Possibilities, Promises, Pitfalls, and Possibilities. The way the panel will work is that each of our panelists today will have 8 minutes to present on a topic of their choice, after which we'll move into Q&A. I encourage all in the audience to submit questions and reflections through the event chat function. I'm also delighted that we'll be joined by 3 experts in their respective fields, each of whom I'll be introducing in more detail in due course. And before I do so, I just want to lay out some context for this panel, in which we'll be focusing on contemporary economic, political, and business issues in ASEAN. As we all know, 2020 was a tough year for the global economy. It was the biggest global recession since 1929, and whichever metrics you look at, it paints a bleak picture for the global economy. ASEAN, as a bloc that was relatively economically open, with trade representing around 120% of GDP, was inevitably going to be hit hard. Countries face a triple shock. You firstly had the shock of supply disruption stemming from workers falling ill, major transit hubs like ports ceasing operations. And then there was a second shock from the impact of containment measures as we tried to stop the virus in its path, but at the same time forcing business closures and job losses. And then the third shock was a broader global recession. Many of the economies in this region are reliant on tourism and external demand. And so this triple shock forced a lot of soul searching and reflection in policy-making circles, globally and in ASEAN. For ASEAN, those questions included how to best develop a unified and coordinated response to the pandemic. One thing that we've learned is that no one is safe until everybody is safe. And then there's the question of how to balance economic and health impacts of the pandemic, how to prevent people from falling into poverty as a result of containment measures, and what fiscal and monetary levers can be pulled to mitigate near-term economic damage. And now, as the virus begins to be controlled and vaccine rollout gets underway, the question really is, how do we build back better? ASEAN is looking for new sources of growth, such as its digitalization agenda. But also, there's a realization that any growth needs to be sustainable. And these are some of the themes that our panelists will be touching on today. And while ASEAN continues to come to terms with these questions, the region also finds itself increasingly so at the center of global attention. And that's a reflection of ASEAN's growing economic and political importance in global affairs. On the economic side, we see, for example, ASEAN positioning itself at the center of the world's largest trade pact, the Regional Comprehensive Economic and Trade Partnership. We also see more foreign firms interested in shifting their supply chains to ASEAN, and the region's young, digitally literate population and fast-growing consumer market presenting attractive opportunities for international companies. A survey of European businesses in October last year showed that 53% of all respondents saw ASEAN as the global region of the greatest economic opportunity over the next 5 years. And for the UK's part, as part of our tilt to the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN is of great importance. Indeed, the UK last year submitted its application to become a dialogue partner of ASEAN. Across multiple levels, we're working towards furthering our links in trade and investment, economic cooperation, the environment, education, science, and technology. And crucially, people-to-people exchange. Conferences like this one are key elements of building up people-to-people exchange. And so with that context out of the way, I'd first like to move on to our first speaker for today, Dr. Julia Tijaja. Julia is the director at the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate within the ASEAN Secretariat. Her current portfolio includes developing ASEAN strategy for the fourth industrial revolution, promoting good regulatory practice, furthering strategic external economic engagement, and the midterm review of the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint. Recently, she provided inputs into the ASEAN Comprehensive COVID-19 Recovery Framework, the centerpiece of ASEAN's response to the pandemic. Julia will be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on ASEAN and ASEAN's response. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rafi. And I think I'm muted. Hi, thank you very much, Rafi, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. First of all, let me thank the organizer for inviting me to the Warwick ASEAN Conference 2021. I have a short presentation, which I hope that all of you can see on screen. Can I go to the next slide, please? So for the next 8 minutes or so, I will just be give a brief presentations on 3 issues. One is the impact of COVID-19 on ASEAN. Second, it's on ASEAN key responses to COVID-19. And third, we're just going to look into more details on the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. Now, like any other region in the world, ASEAN has been affected by COVID-19. Based on the latest data available, ASEAN has accumulated a total confirmed cases of around 2.4 million COVID-19 cases and about 52,000 COVID-19 deaths. This translates to around 2.1% of global confirmed cases and fatalities. Now, these numbers may not seem to be great, to be high, and ASEAN might seem to be relatively successful in containing the pandemic, but we all know that the socio-economic impact has been significant. Now, I'm just going to focus here on GDP growth, on trade and investment, and tourism. On GDP, ASEAN collective economy is expected to contract by about 4.4% in 2020. Now, these numbers might be revised up as improvement comes in the last quarter of 2020, but we have to wait until the numbers come in. And out of our 10 ASEAN member states, at least 4 will be experiencing contraction of more than 5%, and only 3 of our members will be seeing positive growth in 2020. Our trade and investment trend likewise seems to follow the global trend. Based on the data in the first 3 quarters of 2020, ASEAN trade has fallen by about 7.4% year on year, and FDI inflows fell by around almost a third year on year. International visitor arrival, which is our proxy for tourism and travel sector, actually fell by over 80% in the full year of 2020. And this is significant because for many of the ASEAN economies, tourism actually is a key contributor to their economy, and there's a lot of employment involved in the sector as well. Now, we don't know how quick recovery is going to take place, but I think we can rule out a V-shaped recovery. We are working very hard to avoid an L-shaped recovery, and we will likely end up with what they call the swoosh-shaped recovery. But beyond these macroeconomic numbers, I think we need to think about the impact of COVID-19 on the long-term productivity and competitiveness of the region. In particular, I think there is concern on the fall of productivity given foregone investment and the job creation that it entails, as well as the human capital depletion because of children dropping out of school, as well as workers actually falling out of the workplace altogether. Next slide, please. Can I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So from the beginning of the pandemic, ASEAN has been quite quick to act and collectively. No, previous slide, please. Okay. So actually, as early as the beginning of 2020, ASEAN officials has always come together to share information about the COVID-19 situation and the national level responses. In April, our leaders come together to convene a special summit on the COVID-19. And I just want to go through very quickly some of the key initiatives that has been in place. ASEAN has established now a COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund, which can be contributed not just by ASEAN member states, but also our partners and even the industry, the business sector as well. The fund is allocated for purposes such as the joint procurement of health supplies, as well as for joint research and development. There's a number of key health-related initiatives as well, such as the Regional Reserve for Medical Supply for Public Health Emergencies, as well as the ASEAN Strategic Framework for the Public Health Emergencies, which is basically a set of SOPs on how countries can actually act when they are faced with a crisis like the COVID-19 and any other future pandemic. ASEAN is also in the process of establishing the ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases. Now, on the trade part, I think as the moderator earlier on mentioned, one of the key things in such a crisis is to make sure that your normal flow of trade continues, especially on the essential goods. There is always that risk that countries will start closing their market altogether just to ensure that there is adequate supply for their people. But at the end of the day, as we have seen, this is not a good strategy. In fact, what we need to do is to keep markets open and keep our supply chain connected so that the necessity goods can continue to be produced. On this part, ASEAN, as early as June 2020, has actually adopted a plan of action to deal with supply chain connectivity. And in November last year, our economic ministers actually signed a memorandum of understanding on the implementation of non-tariff measures on essential goods to make sure that the trade of these essential goods will continue uninterrupted. Now, the last part is actually on the development of the comprehensive recovery framework, and this is how I would focus my last third of my presentation on. Can I go to the next slide, please? Right, so what is the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework? This is basically a whole of ASEAN consolidated exit strategy from the COVID-19 crisis. It is not just a health strategy, it is not just an economic strategy, and it's not even dealing with just the direct short-term impact of the COVID-19. It has a longer-term vision to help other regions through the reopening period, the recovery period, but also the strive towards long-term resilience. The ASEAN Recovery Framework and its implementation plan were adopted by our leaders last November and is publicly available. So all of you can actually just go to any search engine and then look for it and actually download the document. The framework set out the broad strategies. The implementation plan is actually include detail what are the specific initiatives that ASEAN wants to undertake to achieve those strategies. Next slide, please. So the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework actually comprised of 5 broad strategies. The first one deal with enhancing health system, and here we look at different aspects of the health system. So it's about improving the provision of public services. It's about improving preparedness towards future health emergencies. It's also look at improving the health human resource capacity, data sharing, the use of big data, and so on and so forth. The second strategy looks at the human security aspect of the COVID-19 crisis. We know that the COVID-19 crisis has affected the most vulnerable segments of our population harder than the others. So this part actually look at topics such as gender inclusion, addressing social protection, human capital, how do you address the labor policies, how do you have the workers that's impacted by COVID-19, human rights, and so on. The third part is actually the one that I call the most economic pillar. So this is really looking at the economic recovery and how we can maximize the potential from our own internal market as well as from ASEAN engagement with the broader economic integration. And I think Rafi has earlier mentioned, for example, to how do you actually make use of the RCEP agreement that has been signed. We have to make sure that it enters into force timely. The last 2 strategies is what I call as the forward-looking strategies. It deals with achieving longer-term resilience. And the fourth strategy actually deals with inclusive digital transformation. So this is not just about e-commerce or digital economy, but this is about ensuring no one within your society is actually left behind as the COVID-19 crisis actually accelerate the need and the necessity to actually move on to the digital platform. While the 5th strategy is basically about addressing sustainability in all its dimensions. It's about dealing with sustainable financing, sustainable infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, sustainable investment, and so on. And the framework also recognizes a number of cross-cutting enabling factors required for its effective implementation. Last slide, please. So on my last slide, I just want to focus on what's next for ASEAN. Well, so obviously we now have a recovery strategy. We have the plan. So we will have to be implementing these initiatives in an effective way. So we will need to put in place a good monitoring, advocacy, and resource mobilization in activities. And we purposely make the implementation plan as a living document so that additional initiative and program can be proposed, and we can bring in more stakeholders to support the implementation and existing plan. I just want to highlight that this comprehensive recovery framework does not replace the entire ASEAN work, but given our limited resources, it enables us to refocus our effort on the areas that are most important for our recovery and also long-term resilience. And I just want to close my presentation by highlighting two things. One, I think the COVID-19 crisis has given us this lesson that an increasing number of the challenges faced by the region will be cross-sectoral in nature. We cannot just respond to them on a fragmented, siloed sectoral approach. Everything will have to be coordinated as a community-wide approach, and we can expect to see more of that kind of challenges coming up. And I just want to close the presentation then by highlighting that I think the policymakers, anyone really, should not let the lessons from the COVID-19 go to waste. There is a number of vulnerabilities that has been exposed by the COVID-19. Those has to be addressed even after the crisis, the pandemic is contained. And there is also a number of good momentum that we are doing now in order to facilitate recovery. And those efforts will have to be continued. So in short, I don't think it's going to be we're going to go back to the business as usual even after the COVID-19 crisis. The new normal is not actually going back to the old normal. So with that, I'm going to close my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that comprehensive account of the impact of COVID-19 on ASEAN and sort of what's next in terms of the economic response. One follow-up question, if I may, and I know you've been working on preparing some of the thinking ahead of the next ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting next week under Brunei's chairmanship of We Care, We Prepare, We Prosper. And Brunei has these 10 economic priorities for its chairmanship of ASEAN. I'd be curious to get your thoughts as to what we can expect from the meeting next week, Julia.
Right, thank you, Rafi. So next week, the ASEAN economic ministers will be actually meeting on their retreat. And typically, there's a lot of discussions that we had at the beginning of the year. And as you rightly highlighted, a key part of the agenda will be discussing Brunei 10 priority economic deliverables. Those deliverables are actually focused on, again, the three areas that now we are very familiar with. One is on recovery. The second one is actually on digitalization. And the third one is on sustainability. So there's a number of initiatives that's there. A lot of them are actually under the economic minister's purview, but there are also others on other sectoral ministerial purview. So we'll be discussing that. We'll be discussing the recommendations that has arisen from the high-level task force that had been meeting last week as well. There's a number of housekeeping matters that ministers have to discuss, but it's basically about keeping the AEC agenda, the ASEAN Economic Community agenda on track despite the pandemic, but also accelerating some of those initiatives we need in order to make sure that we are recovering faster and better as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julia. We'll all be looking forward to the meeting next week. And to those who haven't seen it already, I really recommend reading the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework that Julia talked about. It's a very succinct, comprehensive account of some of the key strategies to deal with the pandemic. So thank you very much, Julia. We'll now move on to our second speaker today, who is Mr. Azli Mohammed, who is AirAsia's Group Chief Strategy and Growth Officer. He also serves as a board member of the Malaysia Global Innovation and Creativity Center, as well as an advisory board member for Malaysia's chapter of the Asia Internet of Things business platform. He was previously Chief Strategy Officer at Malaysia Airports and COO of General Electric Malaysia, and has experience across Asia in the energy sectors, TMT, infrastructure, and financial services. He'll be giving us a presentation titled Intensifying the ASEAN Ecosystem, the Post-COVID-19 Response. Azli, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy. I look forward to welcome everyone on your future AirAsia flight as well. I think it's pretty apt to have me right after Julia, given how we're looking at the context of intensifying the ASEAN ecosystem. And I think this is purely from a lens of corporate and how we have shifted and reacted our business focus given from the early start of the COVID until now, and how we are positioning it moving on in the future. Let me start with the AirAsia story. I think what we've we've set the stage in terms of the pivot towards the digital side of the business happens actually prior to COVID-19. It's just the whole COVID-19 period accelerated the whole journey. I mean, we've been always an ASEAN player. Our main playground is ASEAN, and in fact, due to the current environment of travel, the impact of the travel industry during COVID-19, I think we've realized to shift the entire focus of our business more towards ASEAN. We've pared down our stake in Asia India, and unfortunately we have to close Asia Japan. But I think that's looking at the right reason for the whole opportunities that we have in ASEAN. And obviously, you know, it all started about moving people from A to B. You know, ASEAN as a center stage, and you know, using it to leapfrog beyond ASEAN and the greater Asia, for example, and beyond. What has happened is, you know, we realized that we've almost perfected the physical ecosystem from a connectivity standpoint, connecting the dots from not just, and there's a lot of byproduct and adjacencies that we are able to. Hope the connectivity is right there. I had some problem with the visual just now. Okay, so moving on, there's a lot of adjacency within the business that we've spin off into a completely new business, and it's all rooted down to the opportunities within ASEAN. And we realized with the downside of the travel industry, we wanted to fast track and build a similar ecosystem riding on the physical ecosystem that we have, but more on the digital ecosystem. Hence, you know, the shift from just being an airline to a platform player, starting with just an OTA, online travel agency, basically, you know, selling not just AirAsia tickets, other airline tickets, then moving on to hotels and putting other more value proposition on the platform and on the app, positioning ourselves as a super app. And then we look at the whole value chain across building the best super app and having the right digital ecosystem, the likes of, you know, having the financial technology behind it, you know. Hence, we have the fintech ecosystem backed by our own challenger bank, BigPay. And also we look at the revolutionizing logistics and e-commerce. So this journey has made us realize the opportunities that we're able to tap, and obviously on top of that, what we can do more in serving ASEAN, and not just to benefit us as a profit and loss entity, but at the same time, you know, benefiting the entire ASEAN ecosystem, be it the corporations, be it the government, the entire business value chain, SME, most important, communities, and each and every one of you. Hence, what can ASEAN do more? I think I was speaking up, taking some notes from Julia's presentation earlier in terms of the emergence of a number of plans that will be pushing strong from now on, and as well as after COVID. Obviously, the creation of a COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund, the Comprehensive Recovery Framework, the Consolidated Exit Strategy, which will come very handy for you know, the entire ASEAN community. But let us share from an Asia perspective, how do you think that from a perspective of combining the physical and digital ecosystem, what are the areas that we can focus on? I mean, we are a community of closing 700 million people. It's a melting pot of people and opportunities. I mean, and it's obviously now is the most opportune time for us to elevate ourselves as a powerful block of economic, social, digital, beyond the business as usual, beyond of what we're doing. I mean, we should never waste a crisis. I think we should use this opportunity to leapfrog beyond what we're capable of, beyond of just policies, beyond of the brick of mortars capabilities that we have. So I would put it in 4 different spectrum, 4 different buckets that I think that we should be focusing on, above and beyond whatever the policies have been set forth. And I think creating something would be more seamless. I think ASEAN Secretariat has been doing a lot of it. I think you can't just rely on ASEAN Secretariat to enable all these changes. It also has to be on in the specific industries. Also the corporates working together hand in hand, creating the right advocacy strategy and building the right business framework to support. So the 4 areas that I would like to touch briefly is, 1 is travel, 2nd is lifestyle, 3rd logistic, and last but not least is the fintech. I think travel will come back, definitely. Yeah, I mean, at Asia, we've been hit hard, and the whole industry was down. If you look at April last year from the 2019 data, international travel is down close to 100%, about 98%. Domestic travel within this region is about 80% drop. There was a certain time that Asia we had to retire. We had to ground all 250 aircraft of us that we own. But we believe it will come back. It will come in a gradual sense. But obviously, what is the most important part is having a robust travel policy. You may call it travel bubble, travel corridors. What would be the best approach in terms of having a better connectivity between the countries? I think we in ASEAN has the best opportunity to create a network, whatever you want to call the travel protocol, guided by each country's preference when it comes to, like post-vaccination, testing on site, whatsoever. But I think it's important now to have that sorted and agreed. And so that once we are entering a bit of normalization of travel, we can leverage on that. And even though if we have to focus it more on the circle of ASEAN first, there's already a lot of things that can be done and can benefit on. I think that on the surface, without going into the detail, is the key, is the main door that needs to be open to ensure the movement is seamless as possible. Second is lifestyle. And we look at this, I think, when we look at our platform and the app in terms of offerings, it ranges. Look at ASEAN, from food, kind of people that we have. We speak almost more than 1,000 languages in ASEAN. And the products that is very unique, that it's not just from the consumption of ASEAN community, but can be exported to all over the world. Also talents, content. Some of you might be K-pop fans out there. There's a reason why there are some ties in the top K-pop bands, because in the early days of K-pop, it was actually leveraging what used to be the Thai pop. But why didn't Thai pop made it much bigger the way that K-pop did? I think it probably is a time to have an ASEAN pop positioning, notwithstanding the language, and use this to leverage and put us in the global stage. Why I'm using this simple example, because I think given that we will be limited in terms of the perimeters that we have within ASEAN, I think it's the best time that we use it as a launching pad, be it food, product, whatsoever. And I think that's where we can work together within the countries and corporates in really amplifying these opportunities and product. And one thing, moving on to my third element, which is logistic. Travels might have dropped during COVID, but one thing for sure, the movement of goods has really doubled and quadrupled. And even this is where logistic players is benefiting. And in fact, for airlines as well, that's on our core activities, to the point that we've been removing our seats to put goods to fly on the same aircraft that used to be flying people. Yes, obviously there are policies and also non-tariff measures that have been introduced, but I think it's beyond that. I think we are looking at beyond country to country seamless opportunities, and also trickling down to the connectivity on the ground to ensure that we can have a more robust and seamless connectivity from products. Meaning, if someone wants to if I would love to have a bakso that comes from a specific store in Jakarta, it's doable within certain hours because of the connectivity that we have. It's just how we enable it to ensure that, I'm using food as an example, but it can be beyond that. It can be goods. And we have the most interesting time here to really leverage and maximize that channel that we can build to make to get the best out of this logistic opportunities. And I think one thing that is amazing here, how it will benefit the people throughout the supply chain. You know, be it the uncle who sold the bakso in Indonesia, you know, the company that's able to ship it and fly it over, say to KL, and who's benefiting it, who are able to eat it, and you know, reminds him or her of home and everything in between. Last but not least, obviously, from a fintech perspective, I'm not just looking at just enabling, you know, a high-level transaction. Is how do we ease? Looking at how the boom of e-commerce is, it really make it seamless in terms of, you know, transactional opportunities. I think we should be able to look at it across the entire spectrum of payment ecosystem. You know, be it, you know, you're buying things and goods or products within the ASEAN ecosystem, the SME who is, you know, wanting some credit lines that is operating on 2 or 3 countries in ASEAN, and if you go above that value chain in terms of offering, a lot of big banks currently have ASEAN presence. You know, one of the sponsor of the event, CIMB, DBS is huge in a number of countries as well. I think that's one of the opportunities, not just leveraging the big boys, but how can the smaller players, the emergence of the digital bank, challenger banks, to fit into the ecosystem and help benefit all the players along the run. I think my angle here is how can we benefit the entire supply chain, entire community, you know, across the board, from the lowest in the food chain and higher up. And this would result to a powerful block of economic, social, digital, and beyond. So I'll hand it over back to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Azli. It's really fascinating to hear about AirAsia's journey from, like you say, an airline company into now what is arguably a tech company, moving into the subsectors of finance, wealth management, insurance, food delivery as well. And I think, you know, that quote that you said earlier, never waste a good crisis, is one that really resonates in this ASEAN region. Yes, there have been difficulties, but the last year has presented new opportunities, new models of growth, accelerated things like digitalization, as you alluded to. I guess my question is around this point you made around AirAsia doubling down on its efforts in the ASEAN region, and perhaps reducing some of those efforts in India and Japan. I think that's really interesting, that you are doubling down on this region in particular. I mean, in years gone by, there's often been a criticism of ASEAN that too much trade investment is done with countries outside of the bloc, and internal to the bloc, not as much. It's not fulfilling its potential. So I guess my question really is, to what extent do you think you know, the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic has really forced the companies of ASEAN to look a little bit more inwards in search of growth?
That's an amazing question, Ravi. And in fact, it's a huge debate that we had within the management of the company early on during the onset of COVID-19, in terms of how do we look at flag planting moving on in terms of the emergence of not just necessarily new airlines, as well as the creation of new businesses in the digital sphere. Then we look at, we drill down it to the minute detail in terms of the margins and the opportunities that we've captured within the region, ASEAN specifically, and also beyond. I think that's where we realize there's a lot more that we are not able to capture in our own playground, and in some of the areas that I mentioned earlier. And I think it's a rather, you know, it's a no-brainer revelation to us that, you know, moving forward, I think my boss, the founder and CEO, group CEO of AirAsia, Tony Fernandez, literally reminded all the senior management that, you know, the moment he wanted to open an airline outside of ASEAN, please bang his head to remind him that our focus is ASEAN. It was up to that extent. I think, and I think this we may have diversified our business model beyond just airline, but I think that's one thing for sure, that we're looking at milking the opportunities within ASEAN and grow together with the countries.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that really fascinating presentation and that journey of that AirAsia has been on over the last year or so. So I think with that, we can move on to our third and final panelist today. Before I introduce him, a reminder to the audience that you can feel free to post your questions on the stage function. As we get to the Q&A process, I will begin to read some of them out. So our final speaker today is Dr. Reynard Hsu, who will be presenting on sustainability challenges in the 21st century, focusing on where ASEAN is heading. Reynard is a climate change advisor to the Center for Governance and Political Studies, where he's responsible for advancing the organization's work in the field of climate change and sustainability. For his work in sustainability, he was named as one of Asia's 21 young leaders by the Asia Society, a young leader by the World City Summit, and he was one of 10 outstanding young Malaysians for environmental leadership, and one of Malaysia's top 10 most inspiring green warriors. Really looking forward to hearing your insights, Reynard. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for the kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, to everyone. Yeah, so I thought within the next 7 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is to paint a landscape of some of our key sustainability challenges, especially in the 21st century. Next. Yeah, I mean, the concept of sustainability is definitely one that is not foreign. I mean, if you did a quick Google search, you probably find that there are more than 1,000 or different definitions of what constitutes sustainability. But perhaps the most common definition is taken from the Brundtland Report in 1987, which basically states that, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of our present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Next. But if you look at it sort of from a two-tier perspective, we're not just looking at things from an international level, but if you were to break it down and look at things from a corporate perspective, the father of corporate sustainability, John Elkington, has basically said that sustainability is really about focusing on the triple bottom line, to look at not just profit, which is primarily the narrative of how a company is performing, but to also focus on things like planet and people. What are we doing to ensure that we continue to preserve our environment and to continue to focus on good social practices in the process of actually generating profits. Next. So the question here remains, what does it take to create a sustainable future? And moving on to the next slide. So I just want to paint out a quick picture of where we are in terms of our present and our future. So it's been estimated that by 2050, world population will increase at an exponential rate, hitting about 9.6 billion, right, by the year 2050. What that means essentially is that we're going to have to look at generating about 80 to 100 million jobs, right, in the next decade or so. And already unemployment, especially among youth, is already at its highest level. We have developing countries that continue to lag behind in terms of different education levels, especially women and girls in particular. There's growing income inequality, like in OECD and emerging markets. It's anticipated that by the year 2050, the number of people who would hit, the age of 60 years and older is estimated to be about 2 billion. So this really leaves us with a question of, do we actually, have do we actually leverage on such opportunities to develop cities that meet the needs of our aging population? Of course, needless to say, urbanization as well is, on the rise. People are moving, in towards cities, and what's going to happen to different suburban areas? Will they continue to be neglected? So in a nutshell, there are a lot of wicked problems or trends that the world is currently facing. Next. And if we were to look at, our consumption patterns, it's also an issue that is, very scary. At the moment, food makes up about 26% of our humanity's ecological footprint. And if we don't start paying attention to how much we consume, by the year 2050, we would actually need about 4 planets, right, in order to meet the current resources of human consumption, which is quite scary, because the reality and fact of the matter is we just do not have enough natural resources to continue to feed our demands, there is something that we call limits to growth in all of this. Next. And the world, like if you look at the world as 100 people, and this was a publication that was done by the IMC, you can see very clearly that there are huge gaps, right, in terms of age, religion, literacy, poverty rates, even water security. And quite interestingly, a lot of people say that in ASEAN, water security is something that, we don't even have to think about, given the fact that we sort of sit around the equator. But, the reality is that in Malaysia, like we have had so many water cuts just last year alone, like I think in the range of about 10 to 12. And water security is coming up as a huge threat, right, to the economy. Next. Of course, this is quite an interesting picture. I mean, if you look at the progression from the 18th century all the way up to 2006, you can see that global warming is definitely an issue that we are facing, and arguably it's the defining issue of our current generation. I have some very interesting slides that I've obtained from NASA, which basically shows you the temperature shifts, like from the early 1950s all the way up to now, like in the 21st century. So you can see that in the 1950s, like in terms of global mean temperature, they sort of take on sort of a mean or normal curve, in terms of temperature. But if you move on to the next couple of slides, slowly, you can see that there is a gradual shift like towards higher temperatures, and so much so that extreme weather events like in the past used to only cover about 0.1% of our total Earth's surface. And by extreme weather events, I'm talking about floods, droughts, and wildfires. And we have actually seen all of that unfolding right before our very eyes. Australia, for example, was hit by the wildfires that took place in like late December to early January. About more than 1 million different wildlife have died as a result of that. In ASEAN in particular, like we are also not spared from the devastating effects of such catastrophic events, especially given the fact that a lot of our major capital cities are located along coastlines. Jakarta, for example, is already sinking by about 10 centimeters every year as we speak, so much so that they have to look for a new site. And the harsh reality is that there just wouldn't be any economy under a submerged planet. Next slide. So if you look at the 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have basically occurred since 2001. And I believe the hottest year on record that was actually taken, a couple of years back was in 2016. If you move, yeah, it was in 2016, 2019, 2017, 2015, and 2018. But all of these records have actually been broken just last year in 2020, like where I believe that the hottest temperature that we recorded was in the range of about 54.2 degrees Celsius, which is really crazy if you think about it. Next slide. So this slide summarizes what our world would look like in the event of a 4 degrees Celsius rise. We would have 7 million deaths coming from air pollution. Like it will cost economies about 2 to 4 billion, to repair damages that have occurred as a result of extreme catastrophic events. It is estimated that we would have more than 250,000 deaths from diseases by the year 2030. Among other things like waterborne diseases, water cuts, and so on and so forth. It's a very scary world to live in if you think about it, which is also why climate change as an issue has really come out to the fore, like in the past decade, even led by climate activists, like Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old Swedish activist who have literally mobilized about 8 million people in the streets demanding for climate action and climate justice, not just from governments, but corporations as well. Next slide. Yeah, so this is really where I sort of want to leave you guys with, around this thought around, given the fact that all of these different challenges that we're facing, how should ASEAN be responding to this? And are we actually doing enough? Scientists have warned that we only have about a dozen of years left to cap temperatures from increasing by 1.5 degrees Celsius, but already we are not on track towards achieving that. And all of the different catastrophic events that I've mentioned earlier on, will become a reality. At the end of the day, I feel that COVID-19 is just a dress rehearsal. COVID-19 has led to huge amounts of disruptions like global economic lockdowns, but the impacts of climate change is going to be far severe and worse. And the question that I want to throw back is, are we ready to embrace this? And with that, I'll pass the time back to Ravi.
Thanks, Renata. I feel you've left us on a bit of a cliffhanger there in terms of posing that, very profound question for the audience. I mean, we have many budding policy researchers, analysts, future policymakers in the audience today. And I think that point around COVID-19 being merely a dress rehearsal is one that all of our audience should be taking on board. I mean, just talking about ASEAN's current level of ambition and the current state of its plans with respect to tackling the climate change. I mean, clearly climate is recognized as an ASEAN sustainability plan. But I mean, in terms of where we go from here, what more can ASEAN do to think about tackling some of the challenges it faces? And what are your reflections on the current level of ambition?
Well, thanks, Ravi. I think that is definitely a question that I've been thinking about and also working together with different climate researchers. We feel that in ASEAN, we have a lack of ambition, compared to our European counterparts. Personally, I would like to see, something along the lines of a roadmap, like a Green New Deal, that the US, has, which lay out, very clear, definitive plans, on different climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. And of course, having said so, climate change issues have always been something that has been debated, 30,000 feet above ground. It's commonly spoken about among, heads of states, heads of governments. You have a lot of them coming up to the fore. China recently said that, they want to commit towards carbon neutrality by 2060. And many different countries also, like Japan, for example. But we have definitely not seen, the type of commitments like that, among ASEAN. And this is something that I would like to see, heads of state really, drumming in and making those, commitments strongly, but not just talk, but also follow up with strong concrete action plans. What needs to take place. Even with the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that different countries have already committed to, leading up to COP26, right, which will happen this November in Glasgow, I think there is still a huge gap, in terms of what happens at a national level versus the private sector or corporations. A lot of them are still left in the dark in terms of trying to understand, how their own initiatives actually help support the government's agenda in this area. So there are a lot of different areas that need to be tackled. However, I am inspired by the fact that, I am seeing a lot of capital markets in ASEAN, Singapore Stock Exchange, Bursa Malaysia, really coming up to the fore with, the launch of ESG or environmental, social, and governance indexes, which serves to rank and file corporations in terms of how well they're performing in sustainability issues. So, this seems to be sort of a buzzword these days, and hopefully that will continue to incentivize different actors towards really championing and making ASEAN a thought leader in this area.
Fantastic, thank you, Renat. And 2021 is a big year for global climate efforts. We have the US rejoining the Paris Agreement. The UK is certainly has a lot of ambition for hosting COP26 in November later this year. And I think for us, the key thing will be moving away from, like you say, conversations at 30,000 feet in the air to really trying to come up with operationable, tangible outcomes that shift the climate debate going forward. Perfect. Thank you very much for those insights, Renard. That now brings us to the Q&A session. So I'd be grateful if all panelists can now turn their cameras on. And it's great to see that we're getting some questions in the chat function already. Please do keep them coming through. So we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A, and I think, it would be remiss not for the first question to be around the topic of COVID-19 and some of the lessons learned from the pandemic thus far and going forward. So I think my first question for Julia is, what are some of the biggest lessons that ASEAN policymakers should be taking away from the experience over the last year? And then just to add on to that with a question from the audience, how long do you think the recovery phase for businesses in ASEAN will last? So I'll come to Julia first and then over to Asli perhaps on the same question.
Thank you, Rafi. So I think on your first questions, what are some of the key lessons learned? You have different kind of types of crisis. And I think, when you look at the COVID-19 crisis, one of the lessons that we learned last year is that the need for a regional organization like ASEAN with all its bureaucracy to be able to come up with a fast response. And this is something that it shouldn't be taken for granted, because it's a bureaucracy. It has all the different structures and sectors and so on, and that really takes the kind of political leadership from our political masters. That this is a shared crisis, and we actually have to work together and devise a collective response to this particular crisis. So the need to be able to be agile and to be quick in responding is very key. Then secondly, is actually to be able to identify what are some of the immediate needs that has to be addressed. So from the economic side, we know that one of our main concern is if countries, if suddenly trade start being disrupted or supply chains being disrupted. And that is why that was one of the very first response from the ministers, basically to reaffirm that we're going to keep our markets open, we are going to keep our supply chains connected, and we are going to be focusing on those essential goods that are essential to combating COVID-19. And then later on, we start working on the more longer-term response initiatives that deals with the mid-term and longer-term access. And I think the other one, the last key lessons that we learned is that when you're faced with a big crisis like COVID-19, and I think from Renard's presentation later on, also on the climate change, this is not something that can be done by any individual government alone. And it's not even something that can be done just by a government-to-government approach. This is where you actually need that kind of collaboration between the public sector, the industries, and at the community level. Addressing the questions from, I think, one of the audience just now on how long does it take. If you look at our ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, we divided the responses into 3 key stages. So the first one is on the reopening, which is basically what we are doing now. And it leads to what Asli actually talked about. One of the key things that we need when we are cooperating, even as vaccines being rolled out, is to start providing a platform for the safe resumption of travel. And this is why last year ASEAN they adopted the declaration on an ASEAN trade corridor arrangement framework. And now work is actually ongoing to actually discuss on how we can actually come up with this particular framework. So that's the most immediate one. The second one is once the pandemic is contained, it's on the recovery period. This would obviously depend on sectors, but you can say this is something around for the medium term, maybe for the next 2, 3, maybe up to 4 years. But then you also need to address responses for the longer term aspect as well. And this is your digitalization, this is your sustainability discussion, and it's going to go beyond not just in the next 5 years, it might even go beyond 2025 as well, because I think the relevance is anything, it's going to become even stronger.
Thanks, Julia. I think that point you make around the differential in sectors recovery rates is an important one. I mean, there's all this talk of a K-shaped recovery where some sectors recover quickly and then some continue a long road to recovery, which is fraught with difficulties. So, I mean, on that note, I'm passing over to you, Asli, along the same lines of recovery. I mean, from an AirAsia perspective, what does recovery look like for your organization? And sort of, when you're thinking about your response to the pressures we've seen over the last year, how are you thinking about it? Is it 1 year? Is it still mostly near term, or are we thinking 3, 5 years down the line?
Thanks. Let me take the from the context of lesson learned as well, because I would like to write on it because there's some very, I think, amazing learnings that we've gone through for the past 1 year or so. And obviously, the most common ones, people keep on saying that digital transformation is accelerated by COVID-19. But in our case, we've been on pretty much on strong push with regards to digital transformation way before that. But I think from our perspective, although we claim ourselves to be an agile organization prior to COVID, we really went from an agile to agile on steroids. So this is because we're going through survivability mode in terms of business model and how do we need to recover. So this goes back to every single dollar and cents on your cash flow. So this is where in the world of agile design thinking and lean startups, you look at MVPs, minimum viable products, you test it in the market, whatever. So we went through an environment where we push commercialization of MVP right away to customers and learn throughout the way. I think that's the biggest learning for us, because we keep on improving in terms of the offerings, and hence our shift towards digital, to the things that you've mentioned earlier, Ravi, in food delivery, revolutionizing logistic, even brick and mortar restaurants is pretty much, doing things that we've never done before. We look at, obviously we look at the business model out there, we tweak it here and there, make it in very uniquely Asia, leverage in our strong brand, and voila, I mean, there's a lot of learnings to it. We had some hits and misses here and there, but I think the acceleration of the process is just amazing. If we look back to ourselves a year ago in terms of the number of businesses that we've started, for example, today. And the other thing, I think we are a very frugal organization. Cost is very integral in our company, even before this. And I thought, and then I think the organization, I thought we are very effective in managing that. But I think going through a crisis like this, realize there's always other ways to be more effective when it comes to cost, efficiency of the process, and simplification. And we use the early days of COVID to clean up on that, to remove unnecessary layers, to digitalize, automate decision-making and processes. It's not just from a digital perspective, but across the board. I think some of this may be seen minimal in terms of impact, but if you look at scale, it's amazing what we're able to achieve. I think we've been overusing the word pivot. I think it's for us, it's still leveraging on the whole ecosystem that we've built, data that we've had, people who have traveled with us over the years, over the past 2 decades, and how we able to bring back the best value proposition for them. So when you talk about recovery, Ravi, I think we look at it from the entire value prop that we can bring to them, even before we can go back to the normalization of travel. So we ran some simulation in terms of when travel would be picking up again. But I think notwithstanding that, we are looking at much faster flag planting. You may have seen we launched Asia Food in Singapore recently, and going head to head with the competitors there. Now, obviously, we are not as big as the green and the pink boys, but it's all about how we position ourselves in the market and really have a differentiator. And in fact, I think something that we look if 1.5 years before this, we wouldn't be bold enough to say that the split of revenue contribution from airline and non-airline would be 50-50, but that's what we're looking for in terms of recovery.
Brilliant, thank you, Azleen. And just around this point around cutting costs even in the midst of a global pandemic, I understand that AirAsia has been awarded the world's lowest cost airline for around 11 years on the trot. So the fact that you were still able to do more in 2020, I think is testament to your efforts. You touched on digitalization there, and that certainly, I think, is one of the big key themes that has come out of the pandemic. The push towards digitalization has increased. I think one of the other big themes is sustainability and really ensuring that sustainability is embedded as part of our efforts to build back better. So on sustainability, we've got a couple of questions coming through in the chat, Renard, that I want to direct to you. So, I mean, I think there's one question that touches on how do we ensure that people are not left behind, particularly in rural communities in ASEAN, if we are pushing towards sustainability. I mean, we have countries across the region that are quite disparate in terms of where they are in their stages of economic development. So I think that question sort of gets to the core of to what extent can economic growth and sustainability happen hand in hand? And then related to that, there's another question, I think, which is sort of alludes to what's happening in some countries around the world, particularly the European Union. They're thinking about new supply chain legislation to ensure their supply chain is compliant with ESG factors, which may have an impact on some ASEAN nations. So we've seen that in the context of Indonesia and Malaysia with respect to palm oil specifically. So yeah, I mean, just posing those two questions to you. How can we ensure no one is left behind? And will sort of the US's and Europe's push towards sustainability, will that have a sort of differential impact across different sectors in ASEAN?
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. I think those are two very, very big questions. And, you know, to be honest, I don't know if I have a perfect answer for this, but I'm just going to sort of provide a bit of perspective, like from my end. I think first and foremost, like, while there's a lot of emphasis, right, on recovery and normalization, I think really the keyword here is resetting. Because I feel that a lot of the challenges that we are currently facing, especially in the 21st century, is because of how we have been doing things, you know, in the past. And there's, to that effect, there's something that we call the Einstellung effect, like where, you know, if all you have is a hammer, like everything else that you see is just a nail. And I think we need to innovate and come out of that to think of really creative ways, new ways of actually doing things. Because that truly, in my opinion, I think is really going to change the game. And at the moment, we're just trading and following and just going back to normal, if you like, which I think it's not the way of how we should be approaching this. You know, I mean, I like what was being said in our earlier panel discussion that, you know, in every crisis, there is an opportunity and it doesn't come very often. So I think we should seize it and truly make a difference. There was a question from, you know, like one of the chats where you spoke about inequalities and gaps, right? I guess the short and simple answer to that is, I think in thinking about, you know, transitioning economies, moving away from fossil fuels, you know, to a renewable, towards, you know, a renewable and green sector, I think there needs to be a lot of upskilling that sort of takes place. And of course, this process needs to also incorporate, you know, rural youths, like who may not necessarily be well acquainted, like with digitalization. In certain parts of Malaysia, like in rural areas, like, you know, they even struggle with basic things like internet connectivity. You know, if basic infrastructure is not even given or set up in the first place, and they don't even have access to the internet, I think we can forget about talking about digitalization. So I think making sure that there is that foundation, like in terms of equality across, you know, the whole nation is absolutely important, and we need to get our infrastructure right. The second question that came across was the EU nation and the ban that they had, right, on things like palm oil. You know, especially because it's very much tied into things like deforestation. My short and simple response to that is, I think we need to share the narrative that there is such a concept as producing sustainable palm oils, you know, that is free from things like deforestation, exploitation, and no planting on peatlands. You know, this is a narrative that I don't think the West necessarily is well acquainted with. So the type of narrative that we're used to are you know, commercials with Kit Kat, you know, like orangutan fingers, right? Like being destroyed, and the fact that, you know, our palm oil producers are causing all of these problems. But the reality is there are producers that are responsible, that are doing the right thing. And there are certification bodies that basically look at this. But the question is, how do we then sort of translate that, right? And share that narrative with our Western counterparts?
Thanks very much, Renard, for that comprehensive and energetic response to the challenge that comes with perhaps, you know, differential policies on ESG around the world, and how ASEAN can turn it into an opportunity, bringing everyone along with it. Sort of moving tack slightly, and we've got about 5 more minutes left before this panel has to come to an end, but we're getting a lot of questions coming through on the relationship between China and ASEAN, and there's one question on the US-China rivalry too. So, I mean, you know, ASEAN is China's biggest trading partner and vice versa, but I think perhaps often contrary to perception, the US holds the biggest stock of foreign investment in ASEAN. So clearly, you know, both China and the United States are really important economic partners for ASEAN. Of course, they've been locked in a bitter rivalry for the best part of 3 or 4 years. So I'll pass this question over to you first, Julia. But what are your reflections on the impact of the US-China rivalry on ASEAN?
Thank you, Rafi. I mean, obviously, any tensions that's taking place between ASEAN largest and very key partners, as you already say, that creates uncertainties for ASEAN. When we are very, ASEAN participate deeply in outward-oriented value chains. So these two markets, obviously, among our largest export market, and given the way the supply chains are being arranged around the region, that means any uncertainties, even if it's a trade that doesn't involve ASEAN member states, if we are actually participating in that value chains, that will create uncertainties for us as well. On the part of ASEAN, what is important is really to look together towards upholding those kind of key multilateral trade principles that has become, I think we have taken that for granted for quite some time. For decades, there has been the kind of stability and transparency and certainty has provided ASEAN with the kind of stable environment for us to really engage in the value chains activities and so on. And that has now come under threat. And I think this is really where ASEAN has some of ASEAN initiatives such as the RCEP. It's one way to actually try and address that. By having this kind of, I think it's more with the world's largest trade agreements, more with most of our key trading and investment partners, that create the kind of certainties of rules that we are actually involved in shaping that. And I think that's really key. And I think we want to see more of that happening even at the multilateral stage as well. I think there is value for economies like ASEAN. We are kind of middle-sized developing economies to actually really have some say of what's really going on and how do we want to see the multilateral trade rules actually going forward. So I think that would be really key. But I think moving forward, ASEAN will continue with its principles of open market. We will remain open for business. We are not going to take sides in this geostrategic rivalries, if you like. Both of these are actually our very key partners, and we would like to keep expanding our economic integrations with other economies around the world as well. So we will remain open for business, basically.
Thank you, Julia. And I'll pass the same question over to Azli as well. I mean, from a corporate perspective, how do you view the sort of the US-China rivalry? And is it impacting any of your businesses?
Thanks for the question, Ravi. I think Julia has summed it up very well. I think most importantly, as a bloc that is up and coming, it's important for us to remain as open as possible, and I think that has been demonstrated in what has been captured in RCEP and TPP 2.0. And for us, I think it's all about obviously leveraging the whole ASEAN economic activities within the parameters of ASEAN, but obviously not limiting ourselves to just that. And for our business would still be dominant towards travel, and it's not just bringing people in and out of the jurisdiction of ASEAN, but also bringing goods. Hence, it's important for the relaxed terms because it will have a direct correlation in terms of the movement of economic activities, goods, and everything that comes with that. I think they don't have anything else to add on to that, but I think we most importantly, I think Julia is really spot on to ensure that we are not in the crossroads of geopolitical and trade wars, and we need to sort things out. A lot of things mainly at our home ground within ASEAN, and ensure that we get the best benefits and opportunities in linking ourselves to the broader and global world, be it US, China, and beyond.
Great, thank you. I think we've got 1 minute left, so I've got one question for all panelists. I'll be grateful if you could keep your answers to about 20 seconds or so. So we have, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of future policymakers interested in the ASEAN region, in the policy space, in the business space, attending this event today. What would your advice be to them as they embark on their careers and want to maintain ASEAN centrality? I'll start with you, Renard.
3 words: seize the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Julia.
I think it's just be yourself and know what you like. Some of us like working for bureaucracies. Some of us like to be doing research for the private sector. Some of us would like to do academic work. So there's a lot of options out there actually.
And last but not least, Asli, over to you.
ASEAN will be the next big thing. That's definitely.
Perfect. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for your time today. I mean, I think, one of the key messages coming out of this discussion is, there are challenges there, but there seems to be a lot of optimism going forward. And I think for our audience today, that should inspire you with confidence and reassurance as you all embark on your careers too. So yes, the final thing for me to say is thank you to our panelists, thank you to our organizers, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. And Beverly, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi. It was indeed an inspiring panel discussion. Thank you, our distinguished panelists, Mr. Azli Mohamad, Dr. Julia Tijacha, Dr. Renat Siu, and our moderator, Mr. Ravi Prasad, for joining us today and for your insightful speeches. I believe the audience have benefited greatly from your expertise as much as I do. Before we leave, will it be possible if we take a virtual group picture together, panelists? Yes, okay. On the count of 3, please smile at the camera for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. And another one, please. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much for your cooperation, panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We hope you have enjoyed the networking and embassies engagement sessions. With the end of this session, this year's conference is sadly drawing to a close. In line with ASEAN's annually rotating chairmanship, the closing address will be delivered by a representative of the current ASEAN chairmanship, Brunei. We would hence like to invite First Admiral Pangeran Datuk Seri Pahlawan Nur Azmi bin Pangeran Haji Muhammad, High Commissioner of Brunei Darussalam, to the United Kingdom to deliver his closing remarks.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, MC. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to thank the hardworking team, coordinator and participant behind the WAC for this unique opportunity. And I'm very pleased that this conference has delivered insightful and dynamic panel session between our network of bright and talented ASEAN youth, our expert related to climate change, trade, investment, and innovations. It is my great pleasure to hear the successful outcome of this conference. And I believe that over the past 2 days, the conference has successfully managed to create a larger network of opportunity between our youth and expert, as well as emerging and established firm in order to build aspiration and future collaboration. Well done to the organizer, panelists, and participants. I've also noticed the growth and progress of the WIC, and I think all of us present here would certainly like to commend the effort made by the team in managing to make this successful and substantive conference, despite the unprecedented challenges due to COVID-19. This is certainly one of the many examples that clearly reflect our youth resilience and preparedness in adapting to new challenges. While at the same time, I've noticed there was a strong focus and interest from our youth inquiring on the necessary skill needed for the current and future job markets, especially to adapt to the rapidly changing global environment brought about not just by COVID-19, but also by the fourth industrial revolution. As you may all know, Brunei Darussalam is the current chair of ASEAN this year, under the theme, "We care, we prepare, we prosper." The theme portrays ASEAN collective commitments to care for its people and prepare for the future opportunities and challenges, with the goal of ensuring that the whole ASEAN community can sustainably prosper. These include by harnessing the caring nature of ASEAN to build a harmonious and resilient community with the people as its center, to prepare and adapt for the future to ensure ASEAN remain relevant and its people can take advantage of the new opportunity as well as overcome existing and future challenges. And finally, create opportunity for its people to benefit through initiatives that enhance the sustainable prosperity of the region. And that is why I was delighted to see many of our key principles under our theme highlighted and discussed during this conference, from issues encompassing from sustainability, exploring opportunity to adjust to the disruption ahead of post-COVID-19 era, digitalization, inclusivity, and harnessing the care nature of ASEAN, especially amongst our youth. These issues and topics discussed are of great importance to ASEAN in order to help our work together to manage uncertainties that our region and our people may face in years to come. As stressed earlier by Dr. Lingam, our youth plays an important role in ASEAN, and you are our future. Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen, before I end my closing remarks, I once again take this opportunity to thank the team and coordinator behind the WAC for the excellent organization of this conference. I also commend the youth speaker, experts firm, and ASEAN embassies for providing their insights and views as well as initiatives and advice for our youth towards building a brighter, prosperous, and prepared future for themselves. Thank you. I now hand over to our MC.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your compelling speech. Before we leave, we will now be proceeding to take a virtual photo. On a count of 3, please smile at the camera for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And another one, please, Your Excellency. 1, 2, 3. Say cheese.
Cheese.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for being here today and for your speech. Thank you so much. And we hope this year's conference has been a hopeful and inspiring one. We would like to thank all of our embassy representatives, speakers, and moderators, and corporate representatives for making this all possible. Additionally, our huge thanks extend to all the delegates for your wonderful participation. We appreciate everyone joining despite of the time zone differences. Further, we value your feedback and would love to hear from you regarding our conference. Please do check your inboxes and fill out our feedback form so that we can continue improving in future renditions. Lastly, let us thank our team members who have worked tirelessly to make this year's conference a huge success. Do follow Warwick ASEAN Conference on Instagram and Facebook for updates and notifications on future events. Please tag us on any pictures or story you may have taken today as well. Have a good rest of the day ahead, and on behalf of the organizing committee, thank you for being part of the Warwick ASEAN Conference 2021. Here marks the end of the conference. This is your MC, Beverly, signing off. We hope to see you again next year, hopefully in person, for Warwick ASEAN Conference 2022. Bye!
Stayed up till past, forcefully found love and saying no.